Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Carnoto. A member of the North Carolina State Board of Education is alarmed by a new academic performance report on the state's remote learning academies. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brennan Clary. Brennan, who's raising concerns and what are they pointing to?
Yeah, so Alan Duncan is the board member who is raising concerns there in the North Carolina State Board of Education. Essentially, what he's concerned about is there is only a very small percentage of these remote academies that have an A or a B rating. So 2.8% of remote academies were rated A, and 7.8% of traditional schools received that grade. So it's a much lower grade than traditional schools. And only 2.8% of the remote academies had a B performance rating, while almost a fifth, or like over a fifth, 20.3% of traditional schools had that rating. And this is according to reporting from the Center Square, which is a sister site to Chalkboard News. They're both owned and operated by Franklin News Foundation. I mean, there's only 35 academies. There's a much lower number of academies, remote academies, as compared to traditional public schools, right? You have a whole state worth of those traditional public schools, and you only have 35 academies. And generally, these academies are open to students within the state, and so that's something to think about. Is some of those have maybe a few hundred students, maybe they have less than that, and they're usually not bound to a geographic location necessarily in the same way that you can have like an online provider can be nationwide even, but usually with the state funding they're located to that statewide geographic area. But it's not like, okay, you have to be in this city, or like you're bound to it in the same way that you are with a physical school building where you're taking kids on a bus to school, right? That makes it a lot easier for you to say, okay, we can accept all these students there. And one of the concerns, specifically the concerns that Duncan said, was he's worried about the performance of our students in these academies. And quote, "That's not to take anything away from the teachers who are teaching them and the parents and family members that are caring for them. It's about the way the instruction is being received and the limitations of virtual instruction." And he continued, "For all the benefits of virtual instruction, we're really aware of the limitations and the challenges," he said. And then, quote, "We dealt with that through the pandemic and wanted to get our students back in schools as fast as we could because of those limitations." So what Duncan's talking about here is essentially, we did this during the pandemic. We found out that it wasn't that great for students, so we're trying to get them back into the classroom. And then, to have this academic report come in and say that they're being ranked, relatively lower. There's a lower percentage of them getting that A or that B grade as compared to traditional public schools, that, he's raising those concerns there. And we've reported on this quite a bit at Chalkboard News, right, about the concerns of some of these online programs. And specifically, it's hard to have some of the quality controls that you do maybe in a more pencil and paper setting in a traditional public school, because you can have all these different mechanisms for cheating, as I've reported on. There's different AI programs that you can use that you can take a picture and you can do that. And so if you don't have that sort of constant vigilance, you're not sure about the quality. It's also even just the quality of the coursework can vary, and that's something that researchers have found. They've analyzed the actual questions that different courseware providers use for similar, online academies, and they have said it's not as rigorous as it could be. It's not as rigorous as it should be, and students, frankly, are bored, or they're not learning that much. And there's extensive research. We've talked about this at length on the podcast and at chalkboardnews.com. There's extensive research that shows that credit recovery programs, online courses, they can follow students into the workforce in terms of these deleterious effects, like lower pay, and maybe more flightiness in the workforce, and you're kind of missing out on that experience. And so that's something too, that more of an intangible that's, I think, less often talked about, is that when you're with your peers, you're able to develop those soft skills of talking, working together in groups, sort of learning how to interact with your peers. And, there's been a return to in-person work as well. We're seeing more and more of that. So I think that's something maybe to be cognizant of as well. And so, that's like another factor of this, and maybe something that could be pointed out as well. Another thing, so Melissa Davis, director of the state's Office of Virtual Instructions, told the state board that athletes are very interested in this, as well as those with chronic attendance issues or those who want to graduate early, that they're interested in those kinds of programs. And essentially, I think that there are a number of different reasons why this could be a good thing. Like there could be these academic options that work well for students. Maybe you have sickness, maybe like you have these different kinds of family constraints, and there's no charter schools in your area. There's no like flexibility. And then maybe this is the best course of action, or you have specific kinds of needs, or like you want to set up your family in a certain way, and the parents are very hands-on. So I think that this is definitely like you get one of those really top-notch A-rated online academies, and this could be a very good option. And it's just interesting to point out too. I've seen schools for athletes, like specifically tailored for athletes, with some of these courseware providers that I've written about. And it's just very interesting, like that they're very focused on the graduation rate, and there's not necessarily a huge push in terms of like, here's academic, like other factors that show that students have succeeded at, sort of proficiency or any of those kinds of things. So it is interesting to see like how courseware providers will market directly to, student athletes and say like, if you have like an online thing, then you have more time to practice, you have more time to really push yourselves. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing, is that we're seeing in some cases sort of a shift away from that traditional public school in pursuit of sports, maybe for those ultra, like very serious athletes. I haven't heard about it too much, but it's just an interesting facet of this that can work for those students a little bit more.
Yeah, it is very interesting, just the wide variety of interests and reasons why people might be there. And that might even be part of some of the differences, the wide differences in performance in those schools, as well as just some of those academies perhaps have figured out how to address those limitations better than others. Well, Brennan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.